Yeah, thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu. Praise God in a place where God is meant to be praised, because the founders of this place founded it as a place to actually produce ministers that would go and minister the community. So Harvard's grown much since those early days. First of all, I'm very honored to be back here. I haven't been here probably in over 30 years, but I did come and lecture before and had a very interesting time, and had a wonderful time in the bookstores, and I hope they're still there, because I know they're disappearing these days. Everybody's going on Amazon, which is not a wise thing to do, but people are doing it anyway. So alhamdulillah, I want to say that this is I think a wonderful thing that our students, we're a fledgling school in California, and Harvard is a well-established bastion, really, of knowledge on many, many different levels. So we're humbled and honored to be here, and we're certainly grateful for Sister Jenna for doing the hard work with her team. We're certainly very, very grateful to Dr. Khalid Rawahib, somebody I know all the faculty at Zaytuna hold in high esteem for his extraordinary scholarship and contribution to this tradition. So I think Harvard's very fortunate to have somebody of his caliber here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before I get into what I wanted to talk about, I know many of you know this already, but for those of you who don't, the second president of Harvard University, his name was Charles Chauncey, and he was 1592 to 1672. In the mid-17th century, he became a professor and the president of the school. He had studied in Cambridge, in England, and obviously, as you know, Cambridge, Massachusetts was meant in some ways to reflect Cambridge, England, the great hope that the Americans would develop great schools and colleges like Oxford and Cambridge. But what's interesting is that Chauncey boasted that he knew more Arabic than any other person in the American colonies. And he's the one that introduced Arabic into Harvard. I was really struck by the fact that Noah Webster, who's one of the unsung founding fathers, he's really the founder of the American language in many ways, because he really wanted to have a language that was independent of English and to create an American English. He's very proud of it. There's a very interesting book called Founding Grammars, which is about this fight between Noah Webster and Lindsley Murray. Murray was an Anglophile. He was an American who ended up going back to England, but he wanted to see an English established in America. So this is a classic problem with linguists. Webster was more of what we would call a descriptivist, and Lindsay was a prescriptivist. And we're still having these debates today, believe it or not. The Kufans and the Basrans had these debates. The Kufans are closer to the descriptivists, whereas the Basrans were more descriptivists. So they did not like this kind of open-ended approach to language. He studied in Cambridge at a time there was a fellow in Cambridge, Edward Pocock, at the same time. Now, Pocock had gone to Aleppo and spent 4 years studying Arabic and bringing a lot of manuscripts back to Cambridge, and these became, to Oxford, I think. These became the Pocock Library. So there was a great interest in all things Arabic. Noah Webster, who wrote his book it was published in 1828, he tried to prove that English, all languages derive from Hebrew. But what he found, that he found more relations to Arabic than to Hebrew in the book. So you will find, and I don't know where they got typesetting in the 1820s in America. The Arabic typesetting was quite extraordinary. So he has things like cave, that clearly came from kahf, earth, that clearly came from ard. baby, that clearly came from baboos. So he has all these funny derivatives back to Arabic. So that's tradition. The Islamic tradition is not an easy one to unlock for a number of reasons. One, it has a very, very difficult language at its foundation, which is the Arabic language. Arabic, I call it what the Arabs call great poetry and great oratory, as-sahl al-mumtana', the easy impossible. There are elements to Arabic that are extraordinarily accessible. People can learn it quite quickly. It has amazing patterns. You can learn these patterns. But the older you get, the more you realize how impossible this language is to actually master. And this is why in Mauritania, they say, لا يحيط بالعربية إلا نبي. No one can really know all of Arabic except a prophet. It has one of the richest vocabularies in the world. It's also retained qualities of ancient languages. And due to the Quran, it has not developed in the same way that many other languages have developed. Like English, for instance, we once had a dual in English. We also had inflections, so we had inflected language. A lot of that has been removed from the English language. So Arabic is very difficult, and there's a very interesting view about what the first language was in the Islamic tradition. There are different opinions about it. Was it Arabic? Was it Syriania? Was it some unknown language? Imam Asyuti says, من عجائب ما ترى العينان أن سؤال القبر بالسرياني. One of the strangest things is that the questions in the grave will be in Syriania. Well, there's a relationship, obviously, between Syriania, these Semitic languages, with Hebrew and Arabic. So why am I so interested in the liberal arts? Partly because I was brought up in that tradition. My father was a liberal artist. He was very committed to the liberal arts. He'd studied in Columbia when John Erskine had introduced a core curriculum. And Mortimer Adler was there, and the great Mark Van Doren, who wrote a book called Liberal Education, worth reading if you can find it. But I grew up in this, hearing from my father these things, especially the importance of these fundamental knowledges, that without them it becomes very difficult to penetrate pre-modern works. Well, when I became Muslim and went over to the Middle East, and I started studying, particularly with Mauritanians, what really struck me was their emphasis on the same things that my father had talked about in Latin and Greek. Things like the importance of grammar, the centrality of logic, the importance of rhetoric. These were all things that were really emphasized. And then as I grew into understanding the Islamic tradition more and more, what I realized is it really was a parallel tradition of liberal arts alongside the Western tradition. So where do they come from, these arts? They're surrounded in mystery. The obviously Eurocentric view would like to claim that they came from Greece, but we know that the ancient Indians were involved in grammar. They had their types of logic. They were certainly understood what beautiful language was, but very often it's associated with Pythagoras of Samos. He's shrouded in mystery himself because most of the writings about him are 200 years after he died. But he was certainly very interested in the mathematical arts. This is a beautiful painting that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, the School of Athens. It shows Plato and Aristotle. Plato looking up to the heavens, Aristotle with his hand towards the earth. This idea of these two approaches, the Platonic, which is really to study the heavens, and then the Aristotelian, that we should study the earth, and the idea that we need both of these what's interesting is they have Averroes there, and he kind of looks like he's maybe cheating there with Pythagoras. You know, he's definitely trying to catch some knowledge from what's being written on that page. So this is really one of my favorite pictures. It's a young man. He's a student. He probably looks like he's a beardless student, so he's probably early adolescence, maybe 12, 13. Most people who did go to college, finished by 15 generally at that time. But he's being led into the 6 liberal arts by grammar. They're personified as beautiful women, the idea that the young man should pursue them like he would pursue a beautiful woman with great passion, great desire, and purpose. If you look, there's symbols that go with the art. So for instance, you can see the woman holding the scorpion. The scorpion was actually for dialectic. Sometimes it was symbolized with a snake, but it was for dialectic, which is, when somebody has a good proof, it's like getting stung by a scorpion. You have to submit to it. And then over the 7 is prudentia. And prudentia is wisdom, prudence. In Arabic, Imam al-Ghazali in the Mizan al-Amal, he talks about the hikmah nadariya and hikmah amaliya. Hikmah nadariya is what we would call in Latin prudentia, prudence. So the wisdom, the idea of wisdom is practical wisdom, hikmah amaliya, as opposed to theoretical wisdom, which is hikmah, what the Greeks called sophia, as opposed to phronesis. These were the terms. So these are very important distinctions. So she is basically the embodiment of phronesis. When we, if a physician is sued, they will have testimony from people who will testify what a prudent doctor would have done in the situation. Practical wisdom. And so prudentia is really got her bow there, because the idea is that wisdom enables you to hit the target. And in Greek, amartia, New Testament Greek, amartia, in Hebrew, in Arabic, and in Old English, the terms for sin are all archery terms, which mean to miss the mark. So when you sin, it's actually, this is the Socratic idea that it's actually ignorance, that when people behave wrongly, they do so out of ignorance. They mistook an apparent good for a real good, and they went after it, whether it was pleasure or something else. So these liberal arts, which emerge in our civilization, and they are taught and embodied in these extraordinary universities like the University of Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, and then they come to the United States, Harvard, 1636, Princeton, Yale. These are the great civilizational entities. So what's the history of the liberal arts in the Muslim world? Well, there's debate about where the university, the idea of a university begins. But the Arabic word for university is usually jami'ah, which means comprehensive. So it's the comprehensive studies. Sometimes they use kulliyah, which is more for college, but again, it has the idea of the universal, the kulliyah. And so the idea is that you should be studying holistically. One of the things that C.S. Lewis, in his extraordinary work on the discarded image, he laments the loss of holism in our understanding of the world, in our understanding of education. We now study all these disparate subjects, but don't really have any way of pulling them together. I mean, the physicists are looking for this theory that's going to make everything make sense. They're looking for a holistic view in physics. But what about a holistic view that ties everything together? because the ancients really looked at the world that way. They saw everything as being related to everything else. They didn't see any مَا تَرَى فِي خَلْقِ الرَّحْمَنِ مِنْ تَفَاوُتٍ. They did not see any fissures in the creation of God. They saw that it was all somehow united. So Zaytuna College, which we named Zaytuna after, was founded in 737. It was actually preceded by the great university in Qayrawan, which after some Tunisians fled to Fez during some civil strife, they moved into a quarter of Fez called the Qarawiyyin, which means the people from Qayrawan, from Tunis. Well, there was a woman there, Fatima al-Fihriya, who inherited a massive amount of money with her sister Maryam from her father, who was a Tunisian merchant. And I think a lot of Western people don't know how many great institutions were built by women because they did get inheritance in the Islamic tradition. In fact, as late as the late 19th century, if you read Florence Nightingale's her travel log to Egypt, she actually studied the inheritance laws and was upset that we didn't have more progressive laws like these in England. So she was quite struck by the inheritance laws. She actually learned quite a bit. I actually wrote an article many years ago called Florence of Arabia. You might want to take a look at. She actually went into a mosque and in Cairo, and she said, I kept hearing my heart. She was a Unitarian. She said, I kept hearing my heart say, turn to Mecca, turn to Mecca. And I felt as if I'd found the religion I was finally looking for. And then these men shooed her out. And she said, oh, if only there was a place for women in this religion. I could say I found my home. They're quite sad. In any case, I've seen those men who do that. You know, they don't always just shoo women out. They shoo men out sometimes too. In any case, Florence, wonderful lady. She was quite a theologian. People don't know she actually she edited Jowett's translations of Plato. So she's quite a stunning scholar in her own right. She also introduced statistics. These are all asides. She introduced statistics into medical studies. So that, believe it or not, is somebody who I should know, but I don't really know, but it is a younger version of the person standing before you. I'd like to talk to him personally, but don't have a chance. So I'll leave it at that. But I was fortunate enough to actually sit on the chair of grammar in the Qarawiyyin, where we were studying the Ajurumiyya. And the reason, as George Maqdisi shows in The Rise of Colleges, they called it a chair was because the only one that got to sit on the chair was the teacher. So when you talk about chair of the department, that's why they call it a chair. So that actually came from the Muslim world. Al-Azhar University, which interesting enough was founded by the Fatimiyya, which was a part of the Shia tradition. And then later on, when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi comes, he makes it a Sunni bastion. It has an extraordinary history and is still one of the largest universities in the world. It's quite extraordinary. The University of Timbuktu, which I actually visited, is amazing in Sankuri. This is in, if you read Rodney's book on how Europe underdeveloped Africa, a lot of it deals with this area of Africa. But if you haven't read it, there's a beautiful book called, pardon my French here, The Badass Librarian of Timbuktu, which is about how this man here saved all the manuscripts when ISIS showed up. And it was done with the Germans who sent him canisters, and they were able to put them into waterproof canisters and sail them down to Mopti to prevent them from being burnt by these fanatics. So he's an amazing man. And we don't even know what's in a lot of these places. David King reminds us that there are tens of thousands of manuscripts that have never been read yet. So he says we really don't even know what they knew in mathematics, let alone in other subjects. The Zahiri is another one. So now let's just look at the subjects. So obviously Revelation is central. It's central to the Jewish tradition, to the Muslim tradition, and to the Christian tradition. But how do we understand Revelation? Augustine wrote a very beautiful book on Christian doctrine, making an argument that it was absolutely necessary to know these arts before you actually interpret Revelation. We have the ministers in some places, you know, I mean, very often their families are their only flock, but I mean, these are people that really have not studied grammar, and yet they're reading the Bible and interpreting the Bible. If you do read the Bible, you should know what a conditional sentence is. It's very important. You could really mistake what you think God is saying if you don't know grammar. So grammar is very important. So these revealed religions put an immense emphasis on grammar, and none more so than the Muslims, because much of the Jewish emphasis comes after they begin to interact with the Muslims. So you will see the first Jewish Hebrew dictionaries come after they're introduced into dictionary making by the Muslims. It's quite stunning how heavily indebted much of the Jewish tradition is, and the Jewish scholars will admit this and do so in their writings, which is why much of that great period they wrote in Arabic as opposed to writing in Hebrew. So Musha bin Mamun is often read in Arabic because he originally wrote many of his treatises in Arabic. So you had this revealed religion, then how do you understand it? Well, human beings are divided into these two ways of knowing the world. One is the trivium and the other is the quadrivium. And basically this is the idea of quality and quantity. So the qualitative sciences, and I'm using science in scientia in the old pre-modern way, not in the modern way that we've reduced it to material sciences. Grammar was seen as a ilm, as a science. So grammar, logic, and rhetoric, this was the triad, the thaluth in Arabic, sina'at al-thalath. And the most important was considered grammar, because without it, you could not go to the other two. And then the idea of revealed religion, you had law, jurisprudence, theology, exegesis, readings, the qira'at, prophetic traditions, many other subjects, but I'm giving just an overview. The Muslims became obsessed with the quadrivium. They really got very interested. They got from the Greeks and from the Indians also, because they were syncretists. Wherever they went, they would take the books, translate them into Arabic, into Persian, and study them. And for a long time, there was a belief simply that they were the caretakers. This was a common trope in Western academia, that they simply held the Islamic tradition in abeyance, the Western tradition. And then at a certain point, they just handed it over to Europe, and then Europe, of course, took it to another level. Well, the truth is far, far different from that. George Sarton, who was here at Harvard, wrote an extraordinary history of science. 2 volumes of that 6-volume work deal almost entirely with Muslim scientists and their contribution to science. So there was heavy contribution in all of these areas. Harmony is very interesting because Al-Farabi wrote a book that's amazing. It's called Kitab al-Musiqa al-Kabir, the big music book. And they were inventing instruments, adding the famous addition of the fifth for the quintessence, you know, because a lot of this was based on pre-modern ideas like the 4 elements. So the oud, there was a 5th string added to it, and then you had the 6th string added with the guitarra, the Spanish guitar, 6 being a perfect number. So very interesting things with that harmony. So here, this was the idea that if you mastered these sciences, then the grammar would give you facts, data, terms, basic skills. The logic would give you the ability to know the what and the why of things. And then wisdom, rhetoric was the proper use of it in conveying it to others, persuading others of the truth. Very important. Many, many examples of this. We have many, many little couplets and things like this telling us of the importance of grammar. Things like إن رمت إدراك العلوم بسرعة فعليك بالنحو القويم ومنطقي. هذا هذا ميزان العقول مرجح والنحو إصلاح اللسان إن تنتقي. So saying like, if you want to learn quickly, then study logic and sound grammar, because logic will teach you how to think properly, and grammar will rectify your tongue. ومن البيان خذ دليلا للحجة, and from rhetoric, take a dalil for your intellect. تسمو بين الوراء تسمو به بين الوراء إن تنتقي. You will be elevated amongst people whenever you speak. So there's the trivium right there. So, and there are many, many Arabic couplets or triplets that talk about that. The quadrivium I'm not going to go into. It's a fascinating subject, and obviously extraordinarily developed in our civilization. Leibniz and Newton adding an extraordinary tool to really facilitate rapid works in math. The great, he won the Nobel Prize for quantum dynamics, Richard Feynman. In Cal Poly, I actually listened to his lectures. They were fascinating. But in Cal Poly, he described physics as the expanding horizon of our ignorance. But he said that he always taught the freshman seminar using only geometry and he in physics. And a lot of the students hated it because they all knew calculus was much easier. He said, well, the reason I do this is sometimes you get into a horse and buggy for the sheer enjoyment of the ride. So, and MIT is still very serious about geometry. So what was the purpose of all this? Like, why were they doing all this study? What was the purpose? Well, one of our great, great scholars, Abu Nasr, Imam al-Tusi, Nasiruddin al-Tusi, who, interesting enough, died the same year that Aquinas did. He was a Shia scholar, but the Sunnis always taught his books. In the great Ottoman tradition, the Kurdish tradition, they taught Tajrid al-Aqaid. His Ilm al-Hay'a was taught, many, many other books, because he was a genius and he was well worth studying. So he says in his Nasirian Ethics, Akhlaqi Tusi, which was written in Persian, although translated about 300 years ago into Arabic, and really an excellent translation. He says basically that happiness is of three kinds: psycho-spiritual, bodily, and civic happiness, which relates to the society and civilization. As for the psycho-spiritual happiness, it has already been discussed and its subtypes delineated. It is attained through 5 means. First, character development, tarbiyah. Second, mantiq, he says, which mantiq was short for the trivium. So it's used, often they will use, this is itlaq al-ba'd ala al-kull. In Arabic rhetoric, they would use one to indicate everything. It's a type of majaz. It's mursal juz'i, juz'iyya, right? So he says mantiq, and then mathematics, which was the quadrivium, riyadiyat. Fourth, natural sciences, because they saw that you had to have the methodology before you could study the sciences. And fifth, metaphysics. So the highest was metaphysics. They were taking the student to metaphysics, which they saw, this is book 10 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, that this was the highest thing that a human being could do, is to contemplate reality with a sound mind, a free mind, the mind that had been freed by deep training, so that it wouldn't be fooled by its own machinations. Education must be undertaken in this sequence, so that the benefit may be speedily accrued in both abodes. And he wrote a beautiful book, which this is from, which deals with the personal ethics, and then economia, which is economics, and then finally the ethics of the society, civics, so politics. And it's interesting because historically, until the late 19th century, economics was part of moral philosophy, so they did not separate it. It's one of the great tragedies of modern studies is that economics is no longer studied as a moral philosophy. And this is partly because the people that study it don't have morals, and they really don't want to learn them, so they're forced to actually think about what they're doing. Yeah, so, I mean, somebody asked me once, a Saudi man asked somebody at Harvard, he was a professor, he said, do you teach business ethics there? Do you teach it? That was just after 2008, you know, because I don't know if you know this, but the great Ponzi schemer Madoff, like he actually donated to the business ethics school at Shiva. So, my goodness. That's like penance. So then he says, as for bodily happiness, it is attained through the sciences pertaining to the ordering of body's state, health, such as remedies, preservation of health, and the science of nurturing, which are encapsulated in medicine. So medicine is actually not to manage diseases, which is modern medicine, right? They manage diseases. They don't really cure people, unless they're ER doctors. They're really good. They're the best, right? But a lot of these doctors, unfortunately, become drug pushers for pharmaceuticals, right? Did you know that? Everybody's silent. Oh no, that can't be true. I just went to my doctor. Now I have my albuterol. I'm not being serious, facetious. I've got my albuterol here, so yeah. But they're managing my asthma. They haven't cured it. So you keep paying them. Yeah. That's what they love. Long-term patients. That's why they call them patients. You're just patient with your illness. Yeah. But they actually saw health was a good thing, that you should be healthy. Like, you know, we look around in America, people don't look very healthy. They don't sound healthy. Yeah. So how do we restore health to a society? That's a good question. This is what they were interested in. This also includes knowledge of astrology. Now, they understood that there's two types of astrology that they were dealing with. One of them was more about the what they called the amzija. The other, predictive astrology, they all said was prohibited. So they did believe that there was a relationship to times of birth and things like that with the person and their health and things like that. So then he says, civic happiness, this is about politics, is found upon the science related to the ordering of the affairs of the community, the state, daily life, and society, such as sacred knowledge, including sacred law, theology, prophetic reports, exegesis. It includes worldly disciplines such as literature, rhetoric, grammar, calligraphy, arithmetic, geometry, calculation, and the like. The benefit of each discipline is in accordance with its appropriate place, and God knows best what is right. So now look at just Thomas Aquinas. Almost at the same time, the 7 liberal arts do not adequately divide theoretical philosophy. But as Hugh of St. Victor says, 7 arts are grouped together, leaving out certain other ones, because those who wanted to learn philosophy were first instructed in them. And the reason why they are divided into the trivium and the quadrivium is that they are, as it were, paths introducing the quick mind to the secrets of philosophy. This is also in harmony with the philosopher's statement in the Metaphysics, meaning Aristotle, that we must investigate the method of scientific thinking before the sciences themselves. And the commentator, meaning Averroes, Ibn Rushd, says in the same place that before all the other sciences, a person should learn logic, meaning the trivium, which teaches the method of all the sciences, and the trivium concerns logic. The philosopher also says in the Ethics that the young can know mathematics but not physics, because it requires experience. So we are given to understand after logic we should learn mathematics, and with which the quadrivium concerns. These then are the paths leading the mind to the other philosophical disciplines. So it's the exact same flow of, it's quite extraordinary that both the Muslim world and the traditional Christian world had the same basic idea of what education was for and where it should lead to, but also why. And the reason is this: they saw the three most important sciences in the world were medicine, law and politics, and theology and philosophy. And the reason that this is so is they understood that we have a body, we have a social body, and we have a soul. The body has to be physically well so that the soul can thrive. One of the interesting things that the Taoists say is that the reason the Taoists do so many life extension exercises like Qigong is because they actually say that you owe it to your soul to live a long life, because it will take that long to rectify your soul before you leave the body. So it's very important that you take care of your soul, because you have this time allotted to you, and it's very important to preserve that as best you can. That there's an element of choice in good health. Law and politics was to heal the social body from its ailments, and then theology and philosophy, ethics and psychology were to heal the mental and spiritual body from their ailments. So this was the doctor, the lawyer, and the theologian. These were the great medieval things. So now I'm going to quickly get into just an example. So in the Islamic tradition, and these are the arts that I feel when we come into the Islamic tradition, and I'm speaking to the students of Islamic knowledge in the audience. I know there's some other people here, but in the Islamic tradition, one of the difficulties that we have to remember is this is a sequential tradition. Like in mathematics, mathematics is sequential knowledge. You have to learn at each stage. If you don't learn it sequentially, it's going to break down, which is why the Japanese model is so much better than the American model, because you have to get 100 on every test until they put you to the next level. Because if you take somebody who got a D in arithmetic and you pass them to the next stage, they're completely handicapped. By the time they get down the road, they don't understand anything. Well, the Arabic tradition is sequential in this way, the Islamic tradition, is that it's really buttressed upon certain knowledges if you don't have them. So these ulum al-ala, the instrumental arts, the most important ones were the trivium that I talked about. Ilm al-nahu, ilm al-sarf, matan al-lugha, al-lugha itself, ilm al-balagha. And then you had things that enabled you to work with legislative derivations, what's called usul al-fiqh, qawaid al-fiqhiyya. And then you had the knowledge of Quran, how to read it, orthopy, tajweed, the knowledge of the qira'at, and also the nature of the tafsir of it. Then you had the traditions like the mustalahat al-hadith. If you don't know the terms, you'll have a hard time reading in our tradition, because these terms are constantly used. And there's something what E.D. Hirsch called domain knowledge that is expected of the person when you enter into these worlds. And then obviously mantiq. You had mantiq, and Dr. Khalid Ruwayhib has written some really important works on logic in the Arabic tradition, and made some really important clarifications in those works. One of them is the separation of material logic from formal logic, which is a big problem that because of Avicenna. So the Sunnis tend not to study material logic anymore, which is a huge disaster. You have to study the two together. But formal logic, which just deals with the validity of your syllogisms and things like that. But material logic deals with the actual matter, the substance of what the premises and the conclusions are made of, which is called mantiq al-qadaya in one iteration. Now in modern Arabic, they actually call it mantiq al-maddi. But it doesn't work. I don't think it's a useful translation. It coming from us. And then adab al-bahth wal-munadara, which is such a beautiful science. So these were the foundation, and then you moved into the ulum al-ghaya, like why you studied these. It was in order to study revelation, which hopefully would lead to a ma'rifah. So you studied the methodology, And then you studied the sciences themselves, which led to this wisdom. I mean, this was the goal. So I just want to use, this is the tradition that I come from, the Mauritanian tradition. This was my teacher, Marabat al-Hajj. He lived to be 112. He was an extraordinary man. He mastered the Mauritanian tradition. He, in the 1930s, he actually walked to Hajj from Mauritania, a journey of 3,000 miles. Amazing stories. He recounted the entire story to me in his tent over several nights. It was quite stunning to hear it. He was somebody who lived the tradition every night. You know, he had me actually live in his tent, which was difficult because the other students were there. And after about 3 months, I actually asked if I could go live with the students because it was getting a little embarrassing. Just envy creeps in and things like that. So, but during that time, he always woke up about 3 hours before Fajr and he would start his tahajjud and he would pray until Fajr every night. He did that. And the people that told me who lived with him, he'd been doing that for 70 years. It was very consistent. He's one of the most consistent people. They said that Kant, that they used to, set their watches with Kant's walk every day in Königsberg. Marabat al-Hajj was like that. You would know exactly what he was doing. He just had something that some traditions call sacred monotony. You know, this idea of just living, recognizing that it really is Groundhog Day, you know, that life really does repeat itself. And then what do you do with those days that you've been given as they accumulate? There's only about 40,000 of them, right? And then they're gone. No, it's actually 20,000. Yeah, I was giving you double. It's not much. So their tradition, and I did not complete it, but I did study in it. So I did study some of these texts, like the Ajurumiyya, Mulhat al-Arab, the Alfiya. I did not do the Ihmirar or the Kafiya Shafiya. So if you look, in their tradition, they memorize everything. So 114 lines in Ubaidu Rabbihi, in the Ajurumiyya, 375 in Mulhat al-Arab, 1001 in Ibn Malik's text. Ibn Malik's text, by the way, the Alfiya, which is now considered advanced grammar, is intermediate grammar. It's an intermediate grammar. It's actually an abridgment of Al-Kafiya Shafiya, which has 2,793 lines. The Ihmirar, which is Mukhtar wal-Buna's additions to the Alfiya, is 1,800. My teacher, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, memorizes not only the 683 lines in all of these, but shawahid for almost every rule. So we're looking at tens of thousands of memorized lines. And I'm not exaggerating. I really am not exaggerating. And I will just give you one example. Somebody sent me a text on ishtiqaq, 700 lines in Arabic poetry from his teacher, Muhammad Salim Wuld Shayn. And I was very excited about it. So he was actually staying with us at the time. And I came in with the text and I said, "Oh, I found something from your teacher." He said, "What was it?" And I read the first 2 lines, and he said, "Yeah, that's for ilm al-ishtiqaq." And then he started reciting it by rote. And he said that I memorized that when I was very young. He said, and he still had it all there, ready at hand. I was reading once a book by Wuld Afa, a Mauritanian scholar in Medina, and it was he was a Medinan historian. And there was a line of poetry in there, and in the footnote it said, "I learned this line from Al-Alama Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya in the Mahdara when we were students with father." And he said, this man was unusual in that he never heard a line of poetry that he liked, except he went, found the qasida and memorized it by rote. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya told me that, and I know 2 people that did this, that he memorized the entire Jawahir al-Adab of al-Hashmi. Sheikh Khatri wal Buwayba also memorized that. So it's quite stunning, that memory. We don't have that capacity, but these people do, the Mauritanians, and they really do memorize this. In Sarf, they memorize Lamiyat al-Af'al, Ihmirar of Lamiyat al-Af'al, so you're looking at about 195 lines. And then they do Lugha, Ilm al-Lugha, Muthallath Qutrub, Muthallath Ibn Malik, Diwan Sitt al-Jahiliyin. This is in addition to the mu'allaqat. Some of the mu'allaqat are in there, not all of them, but that's in addition to the mu'allaqat. Maqsura, Ibn Durayd was a beautiful poem. Diwan Ghailan, very important for them. It's a very difficult poem. Arabic is very difficult. Maqamat al-Hariri, they memorize the maqamat. The reason for that is for vocabulary acquisition, because there's a lot of really good vocabulary. I actually did read the maqamat, but I preferred Badi'u Zaman al-Hamadani, who I really liked his maqamat. And he had a character called Abu al-Fath al-Iskandari. And Abu al-Fath was what they call Nasab. He was like a religious charlatan. They're all religious charlatans in this genre. But what struck me at the time was a little shocked because it was so outrageous. And then I realized that he was really warning people about religious charlatanry, because there are a lot of religious charlatans. So they've always been around. But he had this character, Abu Fath al-Iskandari, who was very eloquent, and he would come into like a village, and he'd tell all the people, oh, I saw a dream of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that you are a blessed village, but you haven't had rain for several days, and he told me to do a rain prayer with you, but he made a condition, I had to extend the sajda. And they're all like, oh, mashallah, and they all go out, and they do the rain prayer, and they're all in sajda. He gets up, robs all their houses, and then just takes off. You know, it's a very interesting genre of literature. You know, like, watch out, right? That's the message. Somebody comes and tells you, I saw a dream of the Prophet, red flag, right? Yeah, red flag. Keep it to yourself. Yeah. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, uh-oh, watch out, be careful. Yeah. Religious charlatans. Yeah. Put your hand on the television. Can you feel it, brothers and sisters? Send in that money. Yeah. A lot of those. Don't think the Muslims are free of those guys. We have them in a different kind. You know, yeah. They don't get away with it like the poor Christian people. Yeah. You know, and the beauty of the people believe. You know, and the grifter knows, this is the tragedy of the grifter, is he knows that human beings are essentially believers. Like if you meet a guy on a plane and you're sitting next to him and oh, what do? I'm a nuclear physicist. Like, yeah, I know you're not. You say, wow, that's interesting. You know, because people just, why would he tell me when he's really a bus driver? Why would he tell me that? But grifters know that. And that's how they get people. And the worst are the religious ones. Because they're preying on the beliefs of human beings that are very precious. And they're really sinister people. So then we have Balagha. This is the Mauritanian madrasa. Nadam al-Naqaya. I did the Jawhar al-Maknoon, but then they go on. Uqud al-Juman, Nadam Nur al-Iqah, that's from Sidi Abdullah. So that's about 2,240 lines of poetry. Sulam al-Munawraq, Imam al-Akhdari, beautiful little text, informal logic, 142 lines. They do Jawahir al-Mantaqiyya and then Tawshih al-Sulam. So that's their trivium. And then they go into usually fiqh, and they have I did the al-Makhdari, al-Murshid, al-Mu'in, the Risala ibn Abi Zayd, and some sections of Khalil. So I went through that minhaj, but they memorize all of them. I did too. I memorized al-Akhdari and Murshid al-Mu'in, some of the Risala, and very little of the Mukhtasar, but they memorize all of them. Waraqat al-Imam al-Haramain in Usul al-Fiqh, Manhaj al-Muntakhab. These are very difficult books in Qawa'id. And then they do the Quranic sciences. I'm telling you, they do all of these things and they memorize most of them. So it's really quite stunning. Theology, they usually do Sughra al-Kubra, Muqaddimat, Idah al-Dujunna, Wasirat al-Sa'ada, Wadah al-Mubin. So they don't go into some will read the greater books of Aduddin al-Iji, Imam al-Jurjani. Some will read those, the Mawaqif and the Maqasid. And then in Ulum al-Hadith also, very extensive. In the Sirah, Qurat al-Absar, I translated that. And then in Tasawwuf, they read several books. Alhamdulillah, I was able to read all these books. So that's the amount of poetry they memorize. 33,668 when they finish. And they really do, and they retain it. It's quite stunning to see it. This is the reason why wherever you go in the Muslim world, Mauritanians tend to be the dominant scholars. So in Kuwait now, it's the Shanaqita. In Qatar, it's the Shanaqita. In the UAE, it's the Shanaqita. In Saudi Arabia, increasingly, it's the Shanaqita. They're the teachers in the Haram. You find them in many, many places. In Morocco, too, the Shanaqita. So this works, and that's why they have leadership, is because they went through this tradition. It's a very difficult tradition. It is possible. You don't have to have all the memorization, but I'm going to just wanted to look. I did want to go through this, but I think how long, how much time has gone past? Oh, 1 hour. So I think I was going to go through this nice adab al-bahth wal-munadhara just to show you a later tradition, Adad-ud-Din al-Iji, and how succinct they became. This is done in, I read this many years ago. I taught it in Malaysia. It's a beautiful little text, but it just shows you how rich. This was done simply for memorization, but there's an immense amount, many, many commentaries on this text. This is one of the most important books. I wish I knew about this when I first started Arabic. The Turkish and the Kurdish people use this. I once went to a Kurdish bookseller in Istanbul. He's a friend of Dr. Ma'shuq's, and he was so eloquent. And I said that, I asked him, where did you study Arabic? He said, in the Kurdish madrasa. And then I said, what text did you study? He said, and then he told me, حفظت الأجرمية وقطر الندى وألفية ابن مالك وذهبت المتون كلها إلا متنا واحدة. All of them are gone except for one matan. And I said, which one? He said, عوام الجرجاني. And he said, وهذا يكفيني. So I was really impressed with that. So in any case, I was going to go through this just to show you how important it is to learn these things. This is just in harf ba. So in the Mughni, he gives us 14 different uses for harf ba. There's 12 for min. There's all these different types of min. Huh? Well, I'm going to open it up for, we could so ta'leel. لقيت بزيد الأسد أي بسبب لقائي إياه, because I met him, right? وامسحوا برؤوسكم. Some say that's for tab'id. That's Imam Shafi'i's position. Imam Malik said ليس في الباء للتبعيض. So Malik actually rejected that, and he actually said it was for ba zaida, which is one of the 14, ba zaida. So you get into differences of opinion, and these are very important. This is why in usul al-fiqh, they go deeply into what are called the huruf al-ma'ani, because this is where the complexity of Arabic really gets. I love this. This is a little mnemonic device that they taught students to learn the 10 categories of Aristotle. زيد الطويل الأزرق ابن مالك في بيتي بالأمس كان متكي بيده غصن لواه فالتوى فهذه 10 مقولات سوا. So you can see there, so you have this Jawhar, the substance, Zayd, Kam, the quantity, Tawil, Kayf, the quality, Azraq, blue, Idafa, the relationship, he's the son of Malik, Fi Baytihi, the place, Bil Ams, the time, Kana Muttaki, the wada', the position, Biyadihi Ghusn, possession, and then Lawahu, action, and then Faltawa, the passive. So those are the 10 categories. Let me this is very interesting, because my argument is that if you do not know the trivium, you will get lost in our tradition. So I just want to show you one example of this from the opening of Ahmad Zarruq's book on tasawwuf. He says in that book, Al-kalamu fi shay far'u tasawwuri mahiyatihi. To speak about a thing is a consequence of conceptualizing its essence. It's a branch. It comes out of conceptualizing its essence. So tasawwur, he means by that what the manatiqa mean, the logicians. It's simple apprehension, right? You understand what something is. You understand its mahiyah. You either do this badihatan or nadaran. You have to contemplate it discursively or you get it intuitively. The mahiyah is the quiddity. In fact, there's an argument that quiddity comes, quid est, is from the Arabic logicians, mahiyah. What is it? وفائدته ومادته بشعور ذهني مكتسب أو بديهي. So it's either بالاكتساب or بالبداهة. You either get it through acquisition or through intuition. ليرجع إليه في أفراد ما وقع عليه ردا وقبولا وتأصيلا وتفصيلا فلزم تقديم ذلك على الخوض فيه إعلاما به وتحضيدا عليه وإيماء لمعادنه. So he's just giving you all these examples of why that's important. And then he says, mahiyatu shay, the essence of a thing is haqiqatuhu, its reality. Right? حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. قال أهل الحق حقائق الأشياء ثابتة والعلم بها متحقق. This is the foundation of our belief. Like we actually believe that reality is knowable. We're not skeptics. We have a realist tradition, not modern realism, but pre-modern realism. We have a realist tradition. So this is all there, and this is a book on tasawwuf, and he's already using, and then he goes, وَمَا دَلَّتْ عَلَيْهِ جُمْلَتُهُ. So it's what the whole gives you, the surah, the form of it. وَتَعْرِيفُ ذَلِكَ بِحَدٍّ. The way it's defined is through what's called a had, which means that, it's the had is the like had safe. So it's the finitus. It's the end of something. Definition. Definitus. Out of the end of something. It's to get to real and understanding. وَهُوَ أَجْمَعُ. So you're looking for جَامِعٌ مَانِعٌ. That's the type of definition, a comprehensive definition. أَوْ رَسَمٌ. This is a logical term, description. Like the human being is described as حيوان ناطق, the rational animal. His description is حيوان ضاحك, the risible animal. So risibility, the ability to laugh, is what they call a property, a proprium, khasa. It's not arad am, it's arad khas. Like this is unique. Some say pigs laugh, but his argument basically is that this is unique to human beings. It's a property. Like, the essence, if you took the had of a triangle, you say a triangle is the genus, the gens is polygon. This gets into material logic because you have the categories, which are the modes of being that relate to comprehension, but then you have the predicables that relate to extension. And so when you want to say something about somebody, you're going to be using these are the ways that you talk about things. And so what he's saying there is that when you want to define something, you want to give it a had, which is the genus and the difference. What makes it different? So then, what does he say? He says, حُدَّ التصوف ورسم وفسر بوجوه تبلغ نحو الألفين مرجعها كله لصدق التوجه إلى الله. So he's saying that the definition, even though it has over 2,000 definitions, all of them go back to صدق التوجه إلى الله. So the genus then is an inner directedness. The difference is it's to God. So he's giving you the definition. So my point is, if you had not studied logic, this would not have made much sense to you. And there is a translation of somebody who did not know logic, and when you read it, you'll see how ridiculous your translation will end up being because you didn't have that tool to study it. I just wanted to use finally, this really is the end, that this was from the Creed of Imam Tahawi. I have made mistakes in my translation, so this is in no way to fault people. I know people could find mistakes in my translations. We're all learning. Hopefully you don't make big mistakes. But if you look at this passage, which to me was one of the most difficult when I translated Tahawiyah, so الاستطاعة التي يجب بها الفعل من نحو التوفيق الذي لا يجوز أن يوصف المخلوق به فهي مع الفعل وأما الاستطاعة. So that's أما is key, right? أما, so أما is you have أما and إما. So you have to know أما is for تفصيل, right? أما بعد, it's a fasl. So أما الاستطاعة, this is a different استطاعة that he's talking about. So you have to understand, min jihat as-sihha. So this translation, the ability required for an action is from divine facilitation, which cannot be ascribed to a created being. So, min nahwa tawfiq. So he translates from divine facilitation, which cannot be ascribed to a created being, along with the action itself. So, فَهِيَ مَعَ الْفِعْلِ. It's just not right. As for the ability from the view of health, capacity, capability, and sound means, it is before the action itself, and what is related to these are addressed, as it was said by the exalted. And what is related to these are addressed. Again, it just doesn't make sense. Here's another one. And the ability which deeds occur by is simultaneously with the deeds. This ability is the one depending on Allah's creation of the ability to do good. These are all published, by the way. Which is forbidden to ascribe to creation. As for the ability that is associated with health, capability, mastery, and defect-free of instruments, this ability is before the deed, and this is the ability that accountability relates to. So that's correct, that, at least the last part. The capacity of a man is of two types. Capability in terms of tawfiq, which makes an action certain to occur, cannot be ascribed to a created being. There's nowhere to say that. It's amazing. I don't know where he got that. This capability is integral with action, whereas anyway, it goes on. The capability in terms of divine grace and favor, which makes an action certain to occur, cannot be ascribed to a created being. This capability is integral with action, whereas the capability of an action. So, here, the reason I put that in brackets, even though it's not in there, is that the first istita'a is divine enablement that an act requires. And then when he says min nahwa tawfiq, he's really saying for example, an act of obedience or an act of disobedience, right? Which cannot be attributed to a creature, occurs concurrent with the act. As for the material enablement, so that's a different enablement. That's the amma. That results from health, capacity, poise, and sound means. It precedes the act. In sacred law, it is upon the latter that legal and moral obligations hinge. And I used hinge because muta'allaq, mi'laq is a hanger. You know, it's related to the word. So I always try to find words like wasa'. I use capacity because wasi'a and capacious in Latin, almost identical terms. So it takes a long time to do that kind of translating, but it's really good to try to find those. This is an example of textual corruption that you'll find in the tradition. So this was a fatwa from Mardin. Ibn Taymiyyah was asked about these people that didn't practice Sharia, and he said, بل هي قسم ثالث. He was asking about Mardin. يعامل المسلم فيها بما يستحقه ويقاتل الخارج عن شريعة الإسلام بما يستحقه. So this fatwa was used to kill Sadat. This was in Abu Salam Faraj's book, which told them why they should kill Sadat. This was the fatwa of Mardin that was used. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy held a seminar in Mardin at the time. The fatwa was read. During the fatwa, he said that can't be right. Can't say yu'amalu, yuqatalu. And he knew it from balagha. He said it's not right. You wouldn't say yuqatilu bima yastahiqquhu. And so he asked to see the original manuscript. And the people that were there were some people there from the Gulf who were really upset. They were saying, no, don't change the fatwa. You know. So when they got back, he got somebody from the Mektaba al-Zahiriyya to send them the text. And lo and behold, inside the text, this is one of the earliest texts written by the hand of Ibn Muflih, which was one of Ibn Taymiyyah's students. It says yu'amalu. It didn't say yuqatalu. So, I mean, it's very interesting. Big problem. Big difference. So Mardin was a huge problem. So in conclusion, the Muslim education of the Middle Ages is rapidly being superseded by schools and universities, which are both modern and secular. This widespread movement is so recent that it is impossible to tell how it will affect the cultural and social life of Islam. It is clear, however, that in the age of chaotic change, When members of the rising generation are confused by bewildering doubts, the reformers must not neglect the basic principles of medieval education, which were a search of spiritual truth and faith in the reality of Allah. That was the great Bayard Dodge in 1962, who translated the Nasafiyya and other works. And this is a poem, and I'd like to dedicate this talk and this poem to a graduate of Harvard who was one of my mentors, who taught at the Zaytuna College. I think he's one of the greatest graduates of Harvard University that they ever had, really. His name was Dr. Thomas Cleary. He spent 6 years here as a student on full scholarship. He did his BA, MA, and PhD in that time, summa cum laude. And he learned Arabic here, but he also learned Chinese and Japanese, and ended up translating over 100 works from Chinese, Japanese, Gaelic, Sanskrit, Pali, Bengali, Arabic, and a few other languages. But he was a really, really, truly great scholar. And one of the things that he said that he loved about the language studies here was that it was usually taught by native speakers. And he said it's very important to have native speakers because they have an access that people who learn languages as a second language very often don't. And there is some truth to that, although there are those rare native learners outside that do that. So I genuinely believe that even though there have been great, great advancements in knowledge, grammar has morphed into linguistics, although the Muslims were onto that many centuries ago. You have extraordinary types of logic that have emerged. Boolean logic, Lord Russell introducing with Whitehead mathematical logic, symbolic logic, computer logic, fuzzy logic. You also have extraordinary advancements in mathematics. Rhetoric, yeah, I don't think rhetoric has moved that. I would say we've regressed in that area. But in any case, the liberal arts are rediscovered again and again. And this is why Dr. Van Doren called them the seven sleepers, the ones who, like the men in the cave, who fell asleep for 300 years. But they're constantly rediscovered, and the people who rediscover them fall in love with them and will spend their lives really trying to learn them and trying to use them, and then wanting to see others benefit from these great traditions. He says the liberal arts lie eastward of this shore, choppy the waves at first, then the long swells, and the being lost. Oh, centuries of salt, till the surf booms again and comes more land. Not even there, except that old men point at passes up the mountains, over which, oh, centuries of soil with olive trees for twisted shade and helicons for sound. Then eastward seas boned with peninsulas, then Orient, the islands, and at last the cave, the seven sleepers, who will rise and sing to you in numbers till you know white magic, which remember, do you hear? O universe of sand that you must cross and animal the night, but do not rest. The centuries are stars and stud the way. Thank you.